Okay, so today's webinar really it was an interesting one for me because I've been thinking a really lot about this crisis and why we have this crisis. But I guess the more important thing that I'm thinking about is, so what are we really doing about this? How are we doing things differently? Have we used this time to pause and reflect about our lives? Have we used this time to really reflect on what we're doing as human beings? Are we thinking about how we can do things differently and better? And I guess I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday, and she was asking me about my thoughts about the COVID-19. And I guess I come from somewhat of an existential perspective, which is it's almost as if Mother Nature is saying, sort of has made us put the pause button on and say to us that she's tired of us offending her and polluting her air and polluting her oceans. She's tired of the way that we treat each other. And so I think when I was designing this webinar, it came from a much more spiritual perspective, which I don't think I've ever done before, but bear with me and I hope that you enjoy what I've come up with. So essentially what I've done as well is there were 4 webinars in the series, and this is the 4th. So what I've done through this particular webinar today is I've tried to take some of the key points out of the last 3 and put them in this as well, but in such a way that those of you who have only come on today for the first time are not disadvantaged. There are a lot of you online right now, over 40 of you, so hopefully it makes sense to all of you. So the outcomes today, I won't stay here too long, but generally to look at the Australian devastation, I'm focusing on Australia, although there are some of my Fiji family, and there's a few people from South Africa and one from Denmark on the line, which is really interesting. So welcome from me to all of you. What are the world lessons? Coming back to what I said when I started, what are we going to do differently? Looking at the upside of the virus, and also one of the things I discussed in the second webinar was managing stress better. I've been speaking to some of my clients this morning, mostly very stressed, and I was talking to them about how to manage stress better. One of the things that have come out of COVID-19 has been virtual teams, and that was the topic of discussion in my webinar last week, was how do you create and maintain and manage successful virtual teams. I won't stay there too long, but I will come back to them. What lessons have you learned as a leader? I think this is so critical to all of us because, we know that obviously there's different types of leadership and we know that there's different levels of leadership, but what have you learned at whatever level you may be? What are you going to do differently and what can you do better? Talk about what about you as a human being, which comes back to the comment I made when I started today. I think it's time that we really start reflecting on how we are living as humans on this planet. And that's where I sort of go into my existential thing, but I hope you enjoy it. Talk a little bit about goal setting, because if we have been rudderless in the past, or we've been kind of floating in the ocean of our lives, in whichever capacity, professional, personal, what are we going to do about that so that we have more focus and more direction, and talk a little bit about what we do. So I guess the most important thing is, as a new world dawns, what can we learn about ourselves and our lives from COVID-19? And as I said when I started, I think that there's deeper messages here for the human species, not just, well, that was a pretty bad pandemic and, we were worried about a whole reason of things, but it's over now, so we're happy and we move on with our lives. I think we need to take a much deeper dive into how we're doing things. When COVID is over, I guess the questions are, what will you be doing differently? And this was from the very first one, which was about how to be an exemplary leader in a time of crisis. When COVID is over, how will your life be different? How will you stand as an outstanding person to guide the future? What sort of a leader will you be? What kind of team member will you be? What life lessons, and this is a critical one, will it have taught you? So I guess what I'd like you to do, if it's possible, ladies and gentlemen, right now, I want you to, if you have the facility, can you grab a piece of paper or a book and a pencil or a pen? Because as we go through this particular webinar today, I'll stop and pause and give you some time to maybe write or scribble down a couple of answers to questions that I will be asking you like these. And I'll come back to it. But if you've got a piece of paper and a pen, it would be more helpful for you as we move forward. So for those of you who don't know me, there are some of you, I won't stay here too long, and bear with me, those poor people who see this all the time. A little bit about me and why I'm able to talk about these things. I've got a master's in counselling. Essentially what I do is I've spent 30 years dedicating my life to human development on all different areas. I work on 3 continents, Australia, Fiji, and Africa. I do leadership development specifically. I do lots of empowering women programs, which I love. And I can see there are some of my beautiful New South Wales Department of Education ladies on the line. Welcome to you. I write and I blog and I write articles for newspapers and I speak at conferences. So doing this for a long time, and certainly I think even though I sort of go, do I have to do this particular slide every time? As my social media manager says, well, you have to, Karen, because it gives you the credibility to talk about the things you do. So there you go. Okay, so with COVID-19 has come huge stress and uncertainty, and it's all very well substantiated. I mean, we are very, very concerned about, will my organization survive and will my job be secure? I think it's such an important question. And I mean, if our jobs aren't secure, which means we can't feed our families, then our whole lives need to be relooked at. And how will we overcome this particular pandemic? Well, many of us, not all of you online, but many of you are moving from a government funding to fee-for-services. So, for example, you know, we're talking about the NDIS, how that's changed the community sector, the disability sector, and all of the different kind of organizations that come off that. Even though the NDIS has been rolling out for a while now, you know, when you have a pandemic like this, how is that going to impact my service? How will that impact my organization? And the fact is that it has impacted many community-based organizations. And if there is stress and uncertainty around that, that's absolutely normal. Why wouldn't we be stressed? What we also have in some industries and some areas is a lot of unskilled staff, which is, you might say, well, that's great, but at least we've got a job. But that actually affects outcomes and business outputs. Turnover rates of staff come and go, although a lot of the staff are not tending to move out of their roles right now because of the situation. We're moving to an absolutely digital world. You know, it's like never something that we have seen before. And one of the things I talked about last week in the virtual teams, moving to virtual teams, is that many organizations don't have their businesses set up as virtual teams, and some organizations can't, like aged care, out-of-home care, disability services. How do you do that? You don't. But for many other organizations in a lot of sectors, there is a movement from, you know, the face-to-face stuff, the seeing customers or clients face-to-face, to suddenly going digital. And I gave the example last week of my organization. Literally, we were largely face-to-face. I prefer face-to-face. We went to bed, you know, 3 Thursdays ago with a lovely, gorgeous business that I'm so passionate about, to the Friday where there was really nothing except my executive coaching. And one of the things I realized, being quite devastated, to be honest with you, was it took me a weekend or a bit longer to kind of recover from a what now, and realizing actually that I had to go more digitally. So I'm running a lot more webinars, doing online training programs, half-day programs I'll talk to you about later on. But it's scary, ladies and gentlemen. It's like not something I know, it's not something that I'm familiar with. So I'm relying on all of these young Gen Y people to show me how to go digital Zoom and go to webinars and all these kind of things. And it's just scary. And, you know, I'm obviously a baby boomer where we talk about Gen Y. They are just so into it, and they can go boom, 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 bam, 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 and they're digital. But a lot of businesses are not digital. So we have to think about how we're going to do it differently. And online delivery, for example, I was reading some research yesterday. Online delivery in China has absolutely swollen. So let me just quickly give you the research. So essentially, COVID-19 now has sort of moved through China. There are some cases, but nothing like it was. And they're starting to open up the economy, opening up a few businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that have come out of it, because a lot of pandemics and crises bring about springing out opportunities, because there's always, where there's darkness, there's light. So you've got these businesses that are coming out after the pandemic, and as I've just described, the biggest booming industry in China right now is online services. So, you know, you want your food and you organize, you go online and you do your organization, you pay your money. So online sort of services, and then delivery of food has become the biggest booming industry in China. Can you believe that? So they never used to do that. It was more around cooking at home and going and get their vegetables in the market, going home that night and cooking. No more. So online booking and then delivering of groceries has exploded the Chinese market. And young people, Gen Y people, are making millions out of it, whereas before they weren't digital. So there are some upsides about it. Occupational health and safety challenges, how do I deal with virtual teams? How does that mean in terms of them working from home? How does it affect our OH&S? Sickness. Excuse me. Sickness often comes from worry and anxiety, people not knowing what. So a lot of people have got more, sickness, not necessarily COVID, but sickness around feeling unwell, feeling lethargic, anxious, depression, anxiety has increased, I think, by 29%, I read the other day. Ongoing income stress, how will I feed my family? I've taken a hit, I've lost 80% of my business. What I was explaining personally to you just now. Ongoing fatigue, often with anxiety and stress comes fatigue. And fatigue is an interesting thing because you can work too hard or you can not work hard enough. And actually what a lot of the research talks about is that, listen to this, is that fatigue, i.e. being bored at work and not having enough to do, is more detrimental to our health than overwork, which I thought was really interesting. But so I'm just saying all of these things that you see on this list above is often causing fatigue, stress with children, families, and you see all these fun Facebook posts and LinkedIn posts about, or cartoons about, oh my God, I'm pulling my hair out, I'm spending all this time with my children, they're driving me nuts, my wife is driving me crazy, my husband is just delusional. And it's interesting for me as a psychologist that all we really want to do is be able to have a home-based job and a home-based business, and we can see the kids more, et cetera, et cetera. And I appreciate that it's, extraordinary. Normally your children wouldn't be as at home as much as they are, but as they are now, and a lot of you are homeschooling them, you realize, oh my gosh, kids are stressful. Like, let me get out of here and go to work. It's less stressful. So lots of stress, worrying about the future, worrying about money, etc. So there's lots of downsides to it. And I think this came out of the second COVID webinar I did, but I just wanted to add it in here because stress is directly related to the way in which we feel pressure or defeat. So the more we allow stress to build up, the more we get pressurized. The more pressurized we are, the more we are prone to feeling sick, unwell, also a sense of hopelessness. What's the point? How will I ever get out of this? And ultimately, some of us roll over defeated. And that's exactly what I don't want you to do. I want you to think about resilience. And that was the second webinar I did. And resilience is the ability to absorb what's going on around you and to basically bounce forward in the face of adversity. So with your pens, write down on your piece of paper that resilience is the ability to move forward or bounce forward in the face of adversity. Now, that's Karen's definition. The real definition is resilience is the ability to bounce back in the face of adversity. I've replaced the word back with forward because I think it's about bouncing forward even though you've got all of these things going on in your life. It's about taking that deep breath, looking for solutions, and always thinking positively. And that was what I said in webinar number 1. So the Australian devastation, I think, is an important thing for us to have a look at because it's affected us hugely. 66% of Australian businesses reported that their turnover or cash flow had reduced as a result of COVID. So more than 50% of the nation's business have reduced a cut in turnover or cash flow. I'm one of those. Nearly 47% of businesses made changes to their workforce arrangements as a result, including temporary reducing staff, working hours, changing the location where staff are working, including from home, or staff being placed on leave. So I've just been speaking to one of my clients in childcare. They've all managed to stay on board. However, the actual income to their business has taken a 48% hit. Lots of people, for example, another client of mine, her husband has lost 80% of his work and she has lost 60% of her work. People are not, getting the hours or the shifts that they want. And I think it's a really important point that it's actually affecting us. Letty is asking me, she's saying, is there a thing where this COVID-19 situation is affecting our ability to sleep well at night, even if we haven't lost our jobs? or had a family member or friend get sick. Literally, absolutely. When we talk about things like COVID, which is a pandemic, it's a crisis, all of us adapt or interpret crisis or difficult situations around us differently. So some of us, for example, literally would be able to go to sleep and say, well, it's really a problem in the world, but can still sleep well that night because that's what they do. Some of us tend to be people who worry more, so we would be more affected by what's going on, and so we fret more, we worry more, so it might affect our sleep more. It makes us more anxious, even though we might still have our job, even though things are still going on around us, our children are good and our families well, we're watching what's going on around us in the world, and if we're more prone to stress or more prone to worrying about things and anxiety, it affects us more, including our sleep. Some of us, for example, don't then eat as much. A lot of us tend to eat more in stress. Some of us eat less. So the fact that I'm making this comment, Letty, is that it can affect us in different ways depending on us, our personalities, how we see the world, even though things around us, immediately in our family is good, or even in our extended family, we see that we're living in a world that's being affected drastically, and it's worrying us. So yes, it can affect your sleep. Coming back to the Australian devastation, 2 in 5 businesses changed how they deliver their products or services, including shifting to online. That's me, and I would never have thought about that, as I said, but either I do that or I go and work for the government. So I thought, no, I've got to change the way I'm doing things. Over a third of businesses have negotiated their lease and rental arrangements, and a quarter have deferred loan repayments. I went up to my local shopping centre 2 days ago to get some groceries, and let's say that there's 15 clothing shops, ladies and gentlemen, in the particular shopping centre. I'm telling you, not one of them were open. Now, they haven't been open then since COVID started, and I just haven't been up to the shops. But so what I'm saying is that all of those shops, let's say, have lost all of their income over the last month that, we've had this stay-at-home policy. And so when I saw that, I felt really upset about it because, what's going to happen to those people? What's going to happen to their income? What's going to happen to their staff? What's going to happen to the people who supply those businesses? There's always that add-on effect. And I think, literally, that comes back to what I was saying. It might not be affecting us particularly, but we're seeing what's going on around us, and it's really distressing. We cannot move away from the fact that what is going on around us is worrying and concerning and distressing. I think that's really important to say. Many others have appealed for financial assistance from the government or from their banks. So we're living in a situation that really is a nightmare. What we need to do is think about, okay, what can we personally do as human beings and as leaders to change our immediate situation or to try and move forward in a more positive way? The example I just gave you was what I was trying to do, was doing much more online stuff, which I'm now doing and running online programs. But, it was just a way that I had to adapt, because if we don't adapt in things like this, we die. And that age-old thing where, Sylvester Stallone said in Rocky 3, you either adapt or you die. And I used to think, oh, God, yeah, Rocky, but he's right. It's about adapting or dying, and all of us need to think about how we're going to adapt. So lots of devastation in our country, but lots of devastation in my second family, being Fiji, where not only have they had the COVID, but they were hit by a huge cyclone, Patrick, that's devastated a lot of the villages and the communities, which makes me actually want to weep. Now, here I come to my more humanitarian and maybe my more spiritual comments that I started off with. We need to tackle the devastating social and economic dimensions of this crisis with a focus on the most affected. And women, older children, youth, low-wage workers, small and medium enterprises, the informal sector, vulnerable groups, especially those in humanitarian conflict settings. Now, this photograph was the least disturbing. There were many more that were worse. But the reason I wanted to show this to you, because I was born in Africa. I have my heart, or part of my heart, in Africa. And out of this COVID-19, the continent that the world, including Bill Gates and myself, not to want to, put myself in the mighty Bill Gates camp, but Bill Gates made a comment that he has most concern around the African continent, and I'm absolutely with him. So he's just put, I think it was $4 billion into trying to find the answer to the COVID situation and come up with medicine to help with it. But I think one of the reasons he made that comment about Africa is that Africa has ongoing political issues, economic issues, or certainly financial issues. You've got a lot of autocratic leadership. Robert Mugabe is an example. He was there for 40 years in the power, and whilst he was making millions for his own, pocket, a lot of the children in Zimbabwe were starving. So Africa is a continent, I think, that is dying. And unless we as a world start to think about how we are going to look after our world, including countries and continents that are starving, then we are going to be in a perilous situation. And I think that, for me, is what has come out of COVID-19. So here I'm going to ask you, for you just on your piece of paper, what is the biggest thing you think that we can do for the world right now to help the globe? I want you to write that down. And once you've written that down, can one of you or two of you just put in the question box what you've written? What do you think is the biggest lesson that we are learning from COVID-19 that we can do to help the world? Can anybody write in the box so I can just talk to that? Okay, so Elisa, thank you. Brilliant comment. Elisa's talking about share the wealth. I love that because I think it is about a much more equal economic and fiscal policy, not only in Australia, but around the world. I mean, I have the most beautiful 29-year-old daughter. And I came home the other day and she's come to visit me, and she was looking at the Kardashians. And I just looked at this show for 5 minutes. And I said to, Ashley is my daughter's name, these people have no understanding or no real appreciation of what is going on. I mean, they've got all these millions, all this wealth. There's a real focus on plastic surgery and looking good and making money. And it just makes me feel quite sick, actually. So, Lisa, you're right. To share the wealth, what are we doing about these children? And as you said, Alison, COVID is no respecter of anybody. It has no respect. It's like essentially things like AIDS. Recognize we are more than dependent on each other than we thought. And to lose the idea that we are independent, absolutely, Steve. You know why? Because the whole world is connected. So if you've got absolute wealth in one place and you've got dire poverty in the other, COVID, these sort of things, I believe, is what the world, God, Mother Nature, whoever you believe in, is saying, stop, pause, what are we going to do differently? So brilliant comments, and thank you so much. We are directly responsible as a species for the health or the illness of our planet. And I think this is one of the things that I'm getting out of COVID. And it's little things like a friend of mine threw plastic into the bin the other day. And I said to her, so, Deb, this is recyclable. Oh, well, I don't really care about that. And I said, no. You need to care about this stuff. If it's plastic and it's in like a plastic food container, recycle it. It's the little things. Like, for example, if you've got half a glass of water that's left on your desk at the end of the day, don't throw it down the sink, put it into the plant. It's the tiny, tiny things, ladies and gentlemen, that make up the bigger things. And once we know the bigger things, then we start addressing the larger issues, such as the health or the illness of our planet. And so in everyday life, I want us to start thinking about, do we recycle? Do we waste water? Have a shower that's no longer than 3 minutes. You don't need a 10-minute shower. It's the little things, I think, that we're missing. And I think we need to start thinking about what we're doing. We've got the reasonable mind, we call it, which is the logic, 1 and 1 is 2. We've got the emotional mind, where we're more driven about how we feel about things. And, you know, the intellectual mind, i.e. the reasonable mind, is critical to making good decisions, thinking about what we're doing. The emotional mind is really, really important about how we value relationships, people, how we get on with each other, how we look after our animals, how we look after the elderly. And I always think that there's an interlock between those two, which is the wise mind. So the wise mind is to make good decisions based on how you feel about things, the things that you value, but not to be overrun by your emotions, because we need to be reasonable and ultimately wise in everything that we're doing. But I think one of the things about COVID is that, you know, COVID came without us even seeing it. It just came overnight. Christmas was great. Then we had those horrific bushfires, which really, really were distressing and upsetting. Now we're hit by COVID. It's like the world is telling Australia, wake up. So one of the things I think about this particular slide here is that it's like what are we doing differently every day? Like the example I've just said, don't throw water down the sink. What are you individually, as people listening to me on this webinar, what are we going to do individually? Little baby steps. How are we going to think about what we're doing differently with our teams? How can we be better leaders? Before COVID hit, I'll tell you what I felt about the world. It was like a world with chooks with no heads, running, frenetic, rushing. Relationships were struggling. Families were on the back burner. And maybe COVID's come as a, for God's sake, world, press the goddamn pause button and to really start being more wise about what we're doing and really thinking about how we are with each other and our animals and things that depend on us, like how we treat trees and plants and how we not waste water, etc. So what I believe ultimately moving forward from COVID is that countries around the world need to unite to beat the virus, to tackle its profound consequences. It's not an Australian issue, an African issue, a European issue. It's a global issue. And when I would like to say, you know, obviously this is about beating this virus to tackle its profound consequences, but coming back to what we were talking about just now, can we try and reunite as a world to stand together to beat anything that comes our way, but to look after each other and this beautiful planet at the same time? But I think we have to, and what you were saying, Elisa, is to design fiscal and monetary policies to support the direct provision of resources to support workers, households, the provision of health and unemployment insurance, and to scale up social protection and support businesses to prevent bankruptcies. I think a lot of the time small businesses go out of business because they don't know how to run a business. Now, that's not necessarily their fault, but could we have a situation where we've got more business, you know, coaches and mentors who are affordable to help small businesses thrive as opposed to fold? We need to be really, really sure about how we actually are providing health and health insurances. I mean, in Australia, we're really, really lucky in terms of, you know, the social security that we've got, unemployment insurance. We really do that very, very well. But for example, in Africa, there's none of that. So if you're sick and you're not on the health fund, down you go. And when I showed you that photograph just now of that little child starving, that's because there's no resources providing those children, even daily, a meal, you know, which is what things like the World Health Organization and all those humanitarian frontline people are trying to do. And in some cases it's working. But for example, Red Crosses in Africa, right, in different countries around Africa, trying to get meals to children, trying to, you know, bring in medicine, etc., etc. But whilst that's Red Cross and it's maybe the World Health Organizations, it's not enough. It's like we have to all get on that bandwagon. And the other day, it was really quite devastating. I don't know if you saw, but Donald Trump, America is the biggest funder of the World Health Organization, and Trump has taken all of the American funding out of the World Health Organization because he says, and it might be true, that it's badly run and it, you know, isn't efficient or proficient in its service delivery. Well, that might be the case, Trump, but rather get in there and try and fix the problem than remove the funding that's going to help the children in Africa eat a meal a day. You know, and that's what I'm talking about. It's like, well, anyway, I won't talk about leadership in terms of Trump, because we might all have different ideas about that, and some of you might be great supporters, and I respect that. All I'm saying is he didn't take the time to really think about the impact of what he was doing. And I think we need to really think differently about that. Prevent massive job losses because people don't know how to run businesses. But there are always, silver linings to things like COVID. And of course, there are upsides to disasters. It's, as I said, it's moved through China. I actually mentioned this earlier. Grocery delivering in China has reached an all-time high. And what you've got is the high-speed rail infrastructure combined with the e-commerce infrastructure has rapidly made online grocery delivery the fastest, cheapest, and easiest option for Chinese consumers. And apparently, people's home cooking skills have improved during the crisis in China. Well, that's because there's billions of Chinese who are now eating and cooking from home because they couldn't go to work. So obviously there's been an upskill in cooking skills. So I sort of looked at this and I thought, well, I guess that isn't, an upskill for it or an advantage that has come out of it. But even in the most broken situation, there are people who actually come up with great businesses. And I'm certain we'll see that when the dust clears. So, in the disasters come the silver lining. But again, I come back to the question which I'm talking about you today. What change are you going to bring? So life and business moving forward post-COVID. So this is what actually I talked about in topic 2. What I think I'd like you to start considering is, how do I manage my stress well? And do I do it well at all? Or are there things that I could do better? So, for example, by managing your stress well, says the research, you become more resilient. If you are or tend to be resilient, you're able to deal with life's up and downs better. And the studies that have been in resilience, which is so prolific, explain that the more resilient you are and the more you can deal with life's ups and downs, you tend to remain healthier. And ultimately, because you tend to remain healthier, you live longer. And there were other upsides. You live longer. Another one was that you tend to be more financially successful. The third one is that you tend to have better relationships around you. So coming back to that resilience about, being the ability to bounce forward. If a shock comes your way or stresses in your life, take a breather. Think calm. Okay, this is what I'm facing. What can I do about it? And I talked a lot about how can I recover in session 2. How can I recover, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Life will always throw issues at you. Nobody I've ever met has the perfect life when things don't go wrong. It's just not how we live. It's just not what the human experience is about. So my children will laugh when I say to you, how can I recover? And the reason why they will laugh is, since they were able to understand me teaching them, I have always said to them, how can you recover? And so an example would be, excuse me, my son, you'll love this, my youngest child was obviously inattentive, so went into the back of a Tesla. I mean, if you're going to go back into a car, surely it's not a Tesla. Anyway, he was very upset about it, of course, because it's going to cost him money. And my question was, okay, don't talk to me any further about this. Just take a moment and tell me what your thoughts about how are you going to recover from this. Anyway, it was really interesting. He had not insured his car, so it was about a $4,000 debt. And he came to me with a payment plan. So I said, okay, a payment plan. So how are you going to do that? Anyway, long story short, I actually had a discussion with the insurance guys, and it got down to $2,000. He didn't phone the insurance people because he didn't have the skills to know how to deal with it. But he still did have the payment plan to actually pay them back. Now, the insurance company isn't going to take that. So I said to him, all right, Matthew, I will pay the $2,000 and you pay me back. So the point that I made in that, that particular example is that it's really important that we think about everything that we're doing every single day as how can I recover? If you've lost hours in your work right now as you're listening to me, fine. How can you recover? Can you find other work? Can you do something, selling an online program? Can you do packing Woolies shelves? How can you recover from anything that you're facing? I had to throw the slide in because I thought it was a slide that my daughter's done for me for another presentation, but I thought this was just so cool, right? Camels are amongst the most resilient animals on earth. They're obviously built for survival, but I thought this was amazing. They can live for 6 months without a meal and literally months without water in an environmentally stressful environment. I mean, if you look at that absolute beating down sun, parched, there's no soil, there's just rock, and they're just amazingly resilient. And one of the reasons they can survive these temperatures is because everything, the fat is stored in their humps. They don't sweat until their body temp is over 41 degrees. And another reason is that they have their thick coats. They can recover by rehydrating faster than any other animal, drinking 113 liters of water in only 13 minutes. Now, obviously, that's not the human experience. And if any other animal drank water that quickly, they would dilute their blood and kill themselves. So really resilient animals. And I think I just wanted to throw that in to show that obviously they don't know they're resilient because that's the way they're made, but they really, really are pretty amazing creatures. So the question is, can we be pretty amazing humans in our own lifetime to be resilient and to bounce back in the face of, or bounce forward in the face of adversity? And do you have the ability to adapt to your changing circumstances? This was a quick, I'm just going to jump into virtual teams now. I know that quite a few of you would have virtual teams, and that was the webinar that I did last week, but I just wanted to come back to the fact that virtual teams will become the norm. So the changing face of the world has been that you'll have a lot more people working from home in the future, and I talked a lot last week about how that will look and some of the rules and some of the things that you have to think about as a leader in order to have a highly successful virtual team. So for those of you who aren't on the line, who don't have virtual teams right now, just bear with me for a moment. So I was talking last week about getting the basics right if you have a virtual team. So you need to have desperately need to have work rules and roles. So who's going to do what? And how will we do that? And what are the goals of each person? What are the rules of things? So in other words, when do you want things in? So if you want a project in by Friday, 2 o'clock, it's Friday, 2 o'clock, not Monday, 4 o'clock. Oh, I forgot it because I'm working from home. No, that doesn't work. It's still, if they were working in the office, it might be Friday, 2 o'clock. It still is the same rule and the same role. They've still got to get in by Friday, 2 o'clock. The team charter is something I would certainly recommend, how we work and relate with each other. And I talked about communication with a virtual team. How often will we speak to each other, in person, via technology, video? Will we use tablets, etc., etc.? I talked a lot about what media will we use: email, phone, video conferencing, Skype, GoToMeeting, etc., etc. So we need to use a media or medium that we all are familiar with and we all find really, productive for us. If you're not familiar with it, then get the training and use it. We talked about team collaboration, so to use a collaboration team, that tool that shows us what each of us is doing. So, for example, Trello it's really a project management tool where if I'm working with my team, let's say there's 6 of us, I can add something onto Trello and the rest of the team can see what I've added. Then Gail could put something on and we can all see what Gail's done. We can all see, for example, what Bo's put up. So it's a project management tool that's active as you're using it. It's a fantastic tool. The technology, so who will be responsible for maintaining the tools we use? For example, if we're having an executive Skype and there's 10 of us all over Australia, then we need to probably have some high-tech guy in head office or who's working from home to help us should the technology fail, as it sometimes does. Thinking about what happens if it doesn't work. Also talking about ownership and responsibility of the teams working from home. How can you foster positivity? And how can you give constructive feedback when your team is often communicating and writing? And also to bring in fun, like Friday Funnies or Monday Mojos, things that make your team engaged. Make it still fun and enjoyable. I talked some time about awards and recognition. So how will you celebrate with your people? For example, one team comes up with a celebration of achievement for the team each week. Or, can you send them things like, I don't know, if you've got a really outstanding person, can they get send them 2 movie tickets for the week or something? So virtual teams will become the norm. And I sent out the recording last week. If any of you need it, please just email me later and I'll send it to you. But I think it's important that if we are leading virtual teams, that you get your head around the rules and the roles and how to do it properly. So just very briefly for you to think about, what lessons have you learned as a leader through this whole thing? And what I've seen is that people are mostly reacting instead of thinking like a team and focusing on taking, coordinated and proactive steps to moving their teams forward. And I really believe that now more than ever, leaders have to inspire and motivate their people to reach greater heights and to constantly have the "how can I serve you" philosophy, which is the servant leadership philosophy. So the servant leadership philosophy is not so much, you need to work for me and do this. It's more around, as a leader, how can I help you as my staff be better at what you're doing? How can I provide you the resources and the support and the encouragement that you need to help you do a really outstanding job? So here's the question now, back to the paper and the pen. What I want you to tell me is, if you think about COVID and if you think about where you are right now, what one thing have you learned as a leader? If you are a leader, what one thing have you learned as a leader from this, people? And the question then as well is, so what are you going to do differently? You don't have to answer that now, but the one I do want you to answer, one thing I've learned as a leader. And then once you've done that, if you wouldn't mind just shooting me through, just some of you, tell me what you've learned. So, okay, interesting. All right, so Elisa, so good. So Lisa's talking about, what I've learned is to listen for the non-verbal cues. Elisa, that's such an important point. Now, here's the thing. Write this down, guys. Body language is 75% of communication. So I'm just going to take a sip of water whilst you write this down. Body language is 75% of communication. Which means then that if you work remotely or if you're not working with somebody face to face, we are only actually operating on 25% of communication, right? Which comes back to your point, Elisa, around it's really important that you listen for the nonverbal cues. Like if you've got a virtual team, for example, if you've asked a question and there's a pause, or you might have somebody who's talking really, really quickly, and normally they're quite tempered in the way that they talk. You've got to start to listen for more of the verbal cues, because you can't see the body language unless you are obviously doing a Skype or something. And in the Skype, you've still got more of the ability to have the 75% of communication because you can see them. But you make a very, very good point there, Elisa. Literally, you're talking about how important time and clear communication is. Exactly, and one of the key things, whether you're face-to-face or whether you're online, is communication is the lifeblood of being a leader. If you don't communicate regularly, if you don't use a variety of different media, if you don't tune into the team radio, which is you communicating with your people and your people communicating with you, then you're never going to be able to have a highly performing team. If somebody may have stopped talking, you're quite right, Elisa, what does that tell you? It tells you either something's happening with them, or it might tell you that they're thinking, or it might tell you that you're losing them. So you've got to check in with that. Team member may attend a Zoom meeting in PJs. Well, they may, yes, but as long as they're in PJs, they're still not there, hair not done. And that might be their normal. And I think as a leader, then you've got to kind of think to yourself, well, all right, is that okay? I mean, for me, I would prefer, generally, if they're coming into a meeting, have your PJ pants on, but have a proper shirt on. I think the point that I make with PJs and hair not done and that sloppy approach is, I think we need to come back to the fact that it's still a professional business that you're running or team that you're running, and that when you have the Skypes and you have the Zooms, they do come prepared and well-dressed. And I think that's one of the things that you need to make clear with them, because otherwise we're getting into the, I'll get there in time and I'm at home and I'm enjoying myself and I'm cleaning and I'll get to the Zoom when I'm ready attitude. No, even though you're at work, you still come to the Skype meetings or the Zoom meetings professionally. And it might be normally for them. Is it because they're lacking motivation? Well, it might just be because they're having a really great time and they think, oh, what the heck, they're at home and they'll work in their time. And so they're having a kind of relaxed attitude. One of the things I do is I say to my team, when you come on that line, you're working, so be prepared for work, which means to all of them, make sure you look like you're working. So that's one of the rules I'll be saying to them, is you don't come to work looking like you're not at work. So that's a boundary issue, I think. It's not necessarily lacking motivation. It's the I'm relaxed attitude. So I think pull that back. Digging deeper in team members' backgrounds, so my expectations are tailored accordingly. Absolutely, Arietta, and I'm so delighted you're on the line. Welcome. Yes, because we don't know what's going on in their lives. But I think even if you do dig deeper into their backgrounds to see what's happening, that doesn't necessarily mean that you tailor your communication to suit that, or that you drop your expectations of them. I mean, if they have to still get that report in Friday 2 o'clock, it's Friday 2 o'clock. You might then say, look, I'm prepared to give it to you Monday 4, because you're actually listening to the expectations of what's going on in their lives. They might have a sick father, sick daughter, whatever. So you're flexible, Arietta, absolutely, but they still have to, at the end of the day, guys, provide a professional output. I think that's very, very important. So the rules are you come to the Zoom meetings looking like you're at work with that mentality of professionalism. And you might have to be a little bit more flexible because lots of other things might be at home going on, that you can't actually control, and neither can they. So flexible in when you want stuff, but not the quality of what you're asking for. And I think that's why you need to think more about the rules of what you want from them and the expectations that you have of them. I think it's very easy to get that sort of relaxed attitude, but I think as a leader, you've got to pull that back, and still they're working from home and they're still providing a service. So they need to be thinking like that and looking like that. What about you as a human being? Now, this is something that I just want you to think about. So this is really about our relationships, guys. And again, coming back to what I was talking to you about as how am I in my marriage? How am I in my relationships with my children? What do my friends see me as? How do I provide my support to those people who I love and care about? It's really, really an intrinsic question, and this is where I was talking about when I started. I really need us to start thinking about this stuff. Now, obviously, this is my family, which I would never normally put here, but I thought, what the heck? I'm sharing a lot of myself today, more than I would necessarily on a webinar, because I'm talking about how I'm experiencing COVID-19 and obviously wanting you to get to thinking about not necessarily only how I experience it, but the bigger picture stuff. But I think the way that I'm feeling about it adds into or links into the bigger stuff that I want you to think about, because I want the world to start thinking about this. So there I am in a fancy dress with my youngest child. It was a 50s rock and roll. And on the right-hand side here so I have 3 of my children and 3 of my sister's children. So that's my youngest child there. That's my middle child who's just gone into the Australian Army. And that's my daughter who looks very, I don't know what she looks like. And these are my sister's 3 children. So, these are my 3. My most difficult relationship has always been with him. But it's really interesting because it's been over the last year or 2 that I've really thought about my relationship with him. Now, I'm going to share something with you that I hope you can just think about and learn from. He can be quite prickly. So sometimes I've realized that if I ask him something, he can be quite, bitey back. And what I've realized is that I have to change. So, for example, when he was younger, I might ask him something, he'd bite back, then I'd bite back, and then he'd bite back, and then I'd bite back. And then we get into this relationship of at each other. And then I'd walk away frustrated and take away his petrol money, etc. So I took myself away one day and I thought to myself, what am I going to do about this relationship with this young man? And I realized that, and here's what, write this down on your piece of paper, people, please. Write this down. You ready? Okay, here we go. For things to change, first I must change. So I'm going to repeat. For things to change, first I must change. So that means that if you have a relationship in your life that's prickly or difficult or doesn't work, we often look at the other person to change. It's never going to work that way. For things to change, first I must change. So I looked at this relationship with this young man and I thought, okay, what am I going to do differently? So I'll tell you what I've done over the last 2 years probably. I've learned to read him differently. I watch him. So if he walks in the door and he's quite relaxed and he's up, then I take the chance to ask him questions that I think would sometimes maybe irritate him. Like, have you filled in your tax file form, you know? Normally he'd say, well, of course I have, or no, I haven't, don't bug me about it. And because I've learned to watch his body language and he's up, I'll say, hey, oh, by the way, did you remember the tax? Yeah, done it, Mum, no problem. So what I've learned with him is if he's up, I can have those more difficult conversations with him. If he walks in the door and I see he's darker, and maybe like a scowl on his face and his body language is more kind of irritable, then I don't have those conversations with him. So I've learned to read him better so that I pick the time with him better. And the most amazing thing is this, is that in the last 2 years, I and he have turned that relationship around, that it is absolutely a fantastic relationship. He's now gone into the army. I used to have, breakfast with him every Saturday. We'd have dinner once a week. I don't have that at the moment because he's in the army, and I miss him immensely. What's the lesson for the learning here? What one relationship in your life is not working as well as you want it to? That's my question, okay? And every one of you, and there's a lot of you on the line, would have one of those. What relationship in your life is not working? And the second thing is, what are you going to change to see if you can get it to be better? So for things to change in this relationship, what one thing are you going to do differently so it is better? Because it's possible to change that relationship and make it better, but you have to make the change. So what about you as a human being? Bill Gates says, it's about being more caring, more kind, and more considerate. And at the end of this webinar, when I send you the recording, I'm going to send you it's probably about a 10-paragraph statement that Bill Gates has made about the impact of COVID on the world and what he sees it. And I believe he's absolutely right. He talks about the fact that COVID is teaching us that we're not spending time on our relationships. We're not valuing our relationships as much as we should or could, whether that's at home or at work. And he believes that this is a bigger picture to make us stop and pause and reflect. So that's for you to think about. What one relationship is not working and what are you going to do about it? So what will you do differently in your life? I mean, bigger picture stuff, and I appreciate probably some of you may not have thought about this, but this is, the existential stuff I was talking about a little bit earlier on. How will you treat and be better in your relationships? Coming back to the comment that I've just made. What more will you do? What more will you do at work? What will you do differently at work? And what will you do less to live more effectively and successfully? Or what will you do more to live more successfully and effectively? And I guess, here's something for you to think about. Go on to the other side of the page you were on and draw a line down the center of a page. And then on the left-hand side, write, what will I do more? And on the right-hand side of that line, what will I do less? So maybe what will I do more is to spend at least 2 hours with my mother once a week. What will I do less? Watch unimportant television that doesn't add value to my life and rather spend that time with my child, right? So you're looking at what you can do better and less of to start thinking about how you can be a more productive, effective human being, both at work and at home. So the goal setting really was what your future will look like. So, the goals are, I want you, and in that column, it might be another piece of paper that you can, again, take another piece of paper, draw a line down the middle and put on the left-hand side personally and put on the right-hand side of the line professionally. So what are the goals for me personally as a human being? And what are the goals for me professionally as a human being, right? And then what you're going to do is, okay, so what am I going to do professionally so that I'm more effective, I'm better? And you need to have SMART goals, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you might know SMART, some of you may not. SMART is, S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is for achievable, R is for realistic, and T is for time-bound. So if you don't know what a SMART goal is, you can come back to me after this and send me a message and I'll shoot you something. Go on the internet, there's a lot of it. So specifically, what am I going to do? I'm going to spend more time with my team. How I'm going to measure that? I'm going to spend 2 hours extra per week with my team. So it's measurable. It's achievable. Yes, I can move my meeting so I've got those 2 hours from every Friday from 2 to 4. Is it realistic? Yes, it is, because it's realistic. I need to have that meeting to catch up with them before the weekend, and I can move things around to put that time in. Is it time bound? Yes, Friday 2 to 4. And then you do exactly the same on the right hand, where on your personal side, what am I going to do? Specifically, spend more time with my children. When? I'm going to take them out every Saturday afternoon to the movies or to a walk around the lake, or just spend time with them. And you go measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. And if you even come up with one in each of those columns, or 2 or 3 or 4, and then take those things and put them into your diaries and start living that way. Start really looking at how you are living and what you can do better. Eat better. I mean, can you believe this? I think I said this in the very first webinar, and maybe some of you were not on the line. We Australians are the fattest nation in the world. We carry the most incidence of obesity. I was horrified. We're more overweight than the Americans, and everybody thinks the Americans. No, we are. So goal setting, I really want you to think something that comes out of this COVID is, what am I going to do differently in my life? What are my goals? It's all very well to say, oh, I'm going to lose weight. When? Don't know, but I'm going to lose it. Well, that's not a goal. That's a dream. Look at your weight. Look at your health. What are you doing? Are you overweight? What are you going to do about it? Do you drink too much alcohol? Yes, I do. What are you going to do about it? Does your alcohol drinking affect your relationships? And oh, no, never. Well, maybe they do. Maybe you should ask your children. So, existential workshop that you might have to have in your own mind about how you're living. And I think, lastly, we must stand together with our planet. The magnitude of our response to disasters like this must match that of the scale of the crisis. They must be large-scale, coordinated, comprehensive, with country and international responses guided by the World Health Organization, guided by all of us as, key members in the World Health Organization. It must be multilateral, countries showing solidarity to the most vulnerable communities and nations. We must stand together and help build Africa. We must stand together and help the Pacific. My family in Fiji, I see Fiji as my second family. They are absolutely devastated by COVID and then another cyclone Patrick. Villages, communities. What I love about the fact what we do with Australia is we go into Fiji, we go into the Pacific, we provide food, we provide resources. But it's not only Fiji, it's the whole world. Everywhere that's struggling, let us gather together as a nation, as one on this planet, and to stand together to see countries not only united to beat the virus, but also to tackle what's going to come out from this. One of the things I've always said, and some of you know because I've spoken about it, one of the things I've always said is that as I get older, one way I'd really love to end my career is with the United Nations. Because why? I want to see if there's anything I can do to try and make more noise, and God, I can make noise, to stand in a more solid way. I may not be able to, but you know what? This is the thing I want you to think about. When you want to do something professionally, maybe, have a better relationship with your manager, let's say, so you've got a goal to go and do it. and let's say it doesn't work because your manager's just one of those bad-tempered bosses, at least you can put your hand over your heart and say, at least I tried. I think we've got to try. I think, from this COVID virus comes things, what are we going to do differently? At least give it a go, try. I'd rather die trying, having failed, than not tried at all. That's not my saying, it's somebody's saying, somebody's famous. I'd rather die trying than not having tried at all. So you might want to write that down. Love this, had to throw this in. We shall never surrender. I like to put that in as a world. This was his wartime speech. And it's really interesting around him. I won't go into him, but I think still probably he was the most strategic leader in the world that the world's ever seen. For those of you who are on the line are leaders, the reason why I say that is because when he became Prime Minister of Britain for the second time, and that was in the Second World War as it just started, he was in his 60s. And what I love about his strategy is that when Hitler was invading Europe and, moving to invade France and did, it was at that time that he was saying to the European and the American leaders that, he wasn't going to take over the world. And most of the UK leaders at the time, including former Prime Minister Chamberlain, had said, well, no, I think we can come up with an arrangement with Hitler. We don't have to go to war. And Churchill was the only one who said, we will never negotiate with Hitler. We will never, ever go into an agreement of non-war with him because his plan is to take over the world. And I loved what he did because, frankly, if he didn't, we would all be German. So there you go. Again, how can we help you through this crisis? We're coaching. As I said, we're coaching. There's lots of things that we are doing at the moment. Probably the most important thing I wanted to say is that we are running 3-hour training programs via Zoom online, and they all are related to the webinars. So the first 3-hour program is how to be an exemplary leader in a crisis. The second 3-hour, and it's live, it's online, but it's live, me teaching you, is how to build resilience as a leader in this time with your teams. The third one is how to build and manage successful virtual teams, and this is the fourth one. But we're here, let us help you if we can in any way. When I send out the recording, I'll also add the information about the programs I'm talking about, so that you can actually have a look at them. But also, I think if you're not in a leadership position, they're all online, they're all done via Zoom. Speak to your team leader or speak to the leader in your organization. They might be interested, they might not be, but we're doing them anyway. So I just wanted to thank you all for hopefully what you've seen as a really, really beneficial webinar. Before I end off, what I would like to do is just, not too far over time, just to ask if any of you have any questions, if any of you have any comments about today, now's the time to just pop them through. I'd love to hear from you. So please send me anything, any question, anything that you'd like to comment on. Nothing? Nothing that you would like to think about or nothing that you would like to talk at this moment about? Okay, well, what I would like to say is I would like you to think about today. I would like you to be very serious about how you can do things differently moving forward. I'd like you to think about how you will go about changing things that you see that you probably can do differently in your world, and how you can make the impact in your own world, in your own little way, so that you can make a difference, because that would be absolutely fantastic to the world overall. Fantastic to work with you all. I've really loved it. Thank you so much for your time. Look forward to hearing from you. You've got all my information there. Take it forward. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm talking about these things all the time. I post every day, sometimes twice a day. So would love to actually just be linked with you. Be safe, be wonderful, and just be amazing and have the most fantastic day today, and I will speak to you soon. Nice to speak to you, Kath. I'm really happy. I'm revisiting and making my SMART goals right now. Thank you, Kath. So nice to see you online. I really, really enjoyed it. God bless you all. Take care. Cheers for now.